People in the tabletop role-playing world like to talk a lot about the idea of immersion, right? The idea that you are so invested in the story of what's happening in a role-playing game, you feel like you're really there. That's a super cool idea, but something that we don't often talk about is the sort of the after effects where we come out of a game and we find ourselves feeling a certain way in the real world that really is about something that happened during the game. Or vice versa, that things happened in our lives that we bring into the game, and that's affecting what's happening during our session. So, today on Dungeon Discourse, let's talk about decompression. Decompression is something that's really, really important at live-action role-playing events. And it's something that we should also be thinking about a lot for tabletop role-playing. What I talked about at the beginning of the video, this idea that you're feeling emotions in the real world and you're bringing them into game or vice versa, that's something that's called bleed. Bleed is a huge issue that actually merits its own video, so I'm going to make a different one talking a little bit more about that in depth. Essentially, bleed is when you feel things in real life and you bring them into game, or you feel things during game that have some kind of real world effect or ramification on you. And that's really, really important to know for your own mental health. Decompression is sort of a way that you can deal with that and process it after it happens. What we consider decompression at Enkindle Storytelling events, the LARP company that I run, is a series of questions that we ask ourselves at the end of an event. So we go through our high points and low points in character and out of character, and that helps us get a better handle on where our head is at and what we felt during the game. We also have designated decompression spaces at our events where players can go and think about what's going on in the game. If they need to take a break because they just did a really emotional scene, or they're just kind of feeling a little off out of game, like they're maybe not hydrated enough, or they need some blood to get their blood sugar back going, a decompression space is somewhere where you can go and be quiet and get your thoughts back together. Now, why is all of this important? You can probably guess, but the long and short of it is that when we are feeling things out of game and we bring them in game, it's not really fair to the other players that are involved in our gameplay or in a scene with us if we are really, really mad about something that happened to us at work and we end up lashing out at somebody at game. They have no context for that. They didn't know that we were struggling with something on our personal life and it happens to be affecting our gameplay. That's not fair to the other people that have showed up and are trying to tell this story together. Conversely, if we have a problem with somebody in-game for their in-game actions, we need to make sure that if we are doing some kind of thing in-game, like attacking that person's character or interrogating them or having some kind of more emotionally charged scene, that they understand whether or not that is really because of things that are in-game or out of game, right? It's not cool of us to go to somebody and be upset at them in-game for something that we don't like about them out of game, right? That's something that we need to resolve out of game as real people. If your characters have beef in-game and both of you out of game are cool with that and entertaining that kind of storyline and that kind of roleplay, go for it. But you need to make sure that that is what you are doing. You need to understand what your motivations are. So, how do we go about decompressing from an event? We happen to have at Enkindle events a sheet of questions which were developed by one of my co-directors, Meghan, who is fantastic and doing a lot of work on trying to get this stuff normalized at LARPs, especially in our neck of the woods. And so if you find this information useful, please, please, please do go and implement it into your LARP or into your tabletop session. We think that it's very important that everyone go out and use this stuff. We just ask that you credit Enkindle Storytelling if and when you do. So questions to ask yourself or a group of players all together at the end of an event or the end of your tabletop session. How would you describe your character's overall experience this event? Was it positive, negative, a mix of both? What happened that was surprising or disappointing? What were one or two emotional high points for your character? Don't think of you as the LARPer, but think about your character as a person. What was especially great for them? What were some low points for them? As a LARPer, what are your role-playing goals? What do you hope to get out of a game? How do your goals as a player differ from your character's goals as a person? And if you could give one piece of advice to your character moving forward, what would it be? So take a look at these questions real quick. All of these questions specifically target either you, the player, or your character. And it's very important that you separate the two so that you understand where all of the emotions are coming from and how you can process them properly. So if I ask you, how would you describe your character's overall experience this event? A lot of people have a tendency, because they're immersed, to say something like, oh, I had a great game. I met this character and I learned this magical ritual that I've been trying to develop for the last 3 games. And then I fought the servant of the demon lord. And that's a point where whoever is mediating or leading the decompression group can say, I think you mean your character, because you, average person off the street, did not actually fight a demon lord. And if you did, that's awesome. And I want to hear about it. But your character did all those things, right? So what was your character's overall experience? And when we're thinking about high points, emotional high points for your character, what might be good for your character is not something that you, the player, necessarily thought was a high point. And that goes for bad things as well. So your character might have a very intense scene where they get to reconnect with a lost family member. And that could be really, really important to your character. It could be a great moment where they finally get some catharsis on something they've been working towards for a long time. But you, the player, may not have been ready to have that kind of role play. Maybe it calls back to some personal stuff that you need to work out. Maybe you just weren't in the right headspace, you feel, to really enjoy that scene to its fullest. Maybe it didn't quite play out the way that you thought it would. From an out-of-game perspective, like you expected the NPC playing your family member to do X when you really wanted them to do Y, or something like that. But either way, understanding if it's your character's high point versus your player's high point is very important. Likewise, for bad points, I would probably say that a low point for one of my characters would be getting mobbed by a horde of skeletons and like pulled underneath and being left for dead by my peers. That could be really awesome for me out of game, right? I might really enjoy the role play of like screaming like, no, the claws are everywhere, right? And like fighting them off, knowing that I probably will be able to either be resurrected in a fantasy game, or like this was a pre-planned scene, or like I'm just going ham. But my character probably doesn't think that's a very good thing unless they have a death wish for some reason. So again, separating you, the player, and your character, your character, is very, very important. And calling attention to when you're talking about these things from the perspective of your character or you, the player, is also important. As a role player in general, I think it's very important that we also think about what our long-term goals are, such as I want to play a character that helps me understand this part of my identity. I want to play a character that is very forward, because I feel like in my real life I'm very reserved and shy and quiet. I want to play a character that is very sneaky and good at solving problems and puzzles, because that's something that's interesting to me. I want to get the chance to play a villain at some point, right? Whatever those things are, keeping those in mind will help you guide your actions, and talking about them and actualizing them by discussing them with other people helps you bring that back to something that you can actually start seeing in your role play as you go and as you play throughout your career as a role player. Just as important as having those goals is thinking about how those goals for you are different from your characters, right? Your character might really want to die fighting the hand of the dying god in a big climactic battle, right? Or you might really want to become a successful merchant, or invent a new kind of potion, or cure a disease or something like that. But you, the person, may want different things. Your character might have a very grim and sad story arc that will probably end in them sacrificing themselves heroically. and or they may be inclined to think that that is what they want. But you, the player, might say, you know what, I can see that this character has this downward trajectory or whatever. And you personally think that you want to try and subvert that trope, that you want that person to be struggling against this thought process and then work their way out of it towards the end of their story. Finally, giving advice to your character is something that I think is very interesting, because you are looking at the character as a vehicle for story, right? They're a fictional creation. You've made them. It's also a part of yourself. You have, whether you intended to or not, put part of yourself into this character that you're playing. And when you think about what advice you can give that character, you're thinking about, well, what parts of myself can I help this person unlock? What lessons have I learned from my own life that I can apply to this character? What lessons can I apply from playing this character that I can bring back to my own life? Because there's so much of ourselves in the characters that we play, it's important to distinguish between when those things are true for us in reality versus when they are true for our characters and the people that we are choosing to tell these different stories as. If you've never used any kind of decompression technique before, I really suggest that you try it out and see how it works for you or your group. If you play a LARP and you want to try this out, consider talking to the game organizers and seeing if it's something that they're interested in running after game. If you run a LARP, consider making it a normal part of your game policy, making a decompression or out-of-game space for people during your events, and having a player-led decompression circle after game. Something that we've also found is really useful is having a Slack channel, since we have a Slack for our LARP anyway, and having people talk about these things and answer the questions over the course of a couple days after an event. So they're processing what's happening. In the moment, it's so hard sometimes for us to separate a very emotional or powerful moment and distance ourselves from it enough to be able to have a measured discussion about it, or understand, well, I was feeling X when my character was feeling Y, and I think the reason is Z, right? If you have a Discord channel or some other kind of group chat, try making a separate channel where people can talk about this stuff and do so without judgment and help each other figure out, what's going on with your character versus you, the person. If any of this sounds weird to you or it makes you feel a little uncomfortable, I think the reason for that is because we just don't normalize mental health in games. And that's something that is a fact that you see across all kinds of media, whether that's video games or tabletop games. We don't talk enough about the people that are behind the characters that we're playing. In a medium like LARP, where everything is so immediate and we are embodying that person, that character that we're playing, it's very, very, very easy to slip into that bleed between fantasy and reality. With tabletop, we have a little bit more distance because we're sitting around a table and we're rolling dice and we know that we're not really these characters. There's a bit more separation. That doesn't mean that decompression is exclusively for LARP. It's just as valid and just as vital in tabletop role-playing. If you've done any reading on safety tools like Lines and Veils or the X card, decompression is basically just another one of those. So it's not that much of a stretch if you already use those techniques to try and incorporate that into your tabletop sessions. The better you understand your character and what you want out of their story, I think the more you're going to enjoy playing that character. I think if you take any one thing away from this whole discussion, it's that we shouldn't be afraid about talking about mental health, about how we're feeling. The more that we talk about this kind of stuff, the more normal it's going to seem. And when we start understanding our characters as much as we understand ourselves, then we can start playing better and living better. That's going to do it for this quick talk on decompression. If you found this video useful, please do give it a like. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and click that button as well and hit the bell so you don't miss out on the next episode. If you have questions that you'd want to see tackled on the channel, please do send them over to me. You can find me on social media on Twitter at LuchaLibris. And if you want to learn more about our decompression techniques and the game that we use them at, please do check out AttawayLARP.com. We're a Decopunk game based up in New England. If you're in the area, please come by and we'd love to have you as a player or an NPC. If you're anywhere else in the world, we hope that you'll still check the game out and take a look at our policies and rules. We think that we're making something very special. You can follow our LARP company at Enkindle_LARP on Twitter. If you do incorporate decompression techniques at your table or at your LARP, please let me know. Drop me a comment below. I'd love to hear from you about it. So go forth and take +1 forward to act on this information, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.